Hi, my name is Romans. I'm creator of Agile UI and Agile data frameworks. And yesterday has been a pretty big release, version 1.2.0, and quite a few things changed. So I wanted to create this video. And if you haven't heard about Agile UI, I'll also give a very short introduction, what it is and what are the goals of this project. And yeah, I'll show you what's new. So to learn more about Agile Toolkit, just head on to agiletooolkit.org and click the download button over here. What you will get is a combination of two big packages, the Agile UI and Agile Data. Alternatively, you can open your Composer. Let me open this here. So you can open a Composer file and require Agile ADK4/UI, and I'm using any stable version. And let's run the update. Okay, once the update is complete and your application seems like it's working again, you might notice that some things are not loading, and often the cause is that you actually have a local files for GS, and these files are out of date. So Agile UI 1.2 has a lot of refactoring for the public elements, and what I'm gonna do is just delete the public folder, and let's do the inspect. Let's see where the resources are loaded from right now. So we have Agile CSS loaded from RawGit, and as you see, it's also loading the Agile UI JavaScript from RawGit. So now it's more likely for it to work. Okay, the next big change, so that's dashboard, which I want to show you, is I probably should mention that as well. So in the past, the way we structured our examples is by using the layout, and would add elements into the layout. Now we're adding elements into app. All right, so let's add a new button over here, and it should seem fine. The button is over here. So the app class is not a non-visual class, but if you do set the layout, then the add acts as a proxy, so it will actually add the element inside the layout. And it's also pretty much easier for beginners to understand. So they see app, add button, they say, oh yeah, okay, you adding a button inside the app, makes sense, right? So it appears over here. Next big change in Agile 4.2 is the way how we pass the arguments. And as I developed Agile Core, Agile Data, and then Agile UI, there was a lot of inconsistency in the way how you describe things. So initially, this was the backward compatible way for adding buttons, and it sort of worked, but was working inconsistently. Then I have introduced a new way where you do new button like this, and it still adds the button. So that's kind of a new way to adding. And if you do want to use type hinting, you could do button could do that, and then when you type button, if you have looks like my plugin is not working, but if you have autocomplete, it will say, okay, there's a set here and add class and various other methods which you can use. Right, so this is the second way, and we needed to maintain the consistency between two methods. So let me just add two buttons in here, and I'll show them side by side. So this can be button, and this will be button. Yeah. So as you might already know, it is possible to take the first argument to add and wrap it into these square brackets, creating an array, and it works in the same way. So now we have two buttons over here, but in here you can specify label, so hello world. And if you do that, it's displayed on the button. Moreover, you can specify class. You can do red. And that's pretty handy. But with the button, so the way how that worked is you needed to pass the array in the past, and to be honest, it still works. It's just not a very nice way to do it. Let's do red in here. And we do achieve the same effect. But we know the reason why you're using that is because you appreciate the type hinting of your editor, and many users do, many developers do. So we wanted to clear up the arguments, and now you can do hello world and pass the parameter red over here, and it will have the same effect. So the constructor of the button, if you load up the button class, will actually contain two parameters, the first being a label and the second being a class. Now, it's for some other elements such as form. If you're creating a form, then the parameters, you would only be able to pass one parameter, which is a class or combination of classes. You do red, big, still, like that, right? But each element can define which parameters will be used. And this format, the way how that format works is you specify the class here, and then all additional numeric keys of this array will be inserted into the constructor like that. So it's like a convenient way of doing the button like this. Now, the other thing is that, which was pretty cool in the past, is the ability to specify named arguments like icon book. And if you create button with this, you see there's a book in here, and unfortunately you can't do it like this here, so you can't specify the parameter. But what this parameter actually does now, it takes the object of button and assigns icon to book. That's now it's a identical code, so they can be used interchangeably, this or this. And yeah, so that that's being cleared up, and it is consistent through the framework. Now, also what you could do in here is do a new you can actually specify an object for, yes, and yeah, I have to mention that this thing, we are calling this a seed. So that's kind of the something we use to create an object. So what we've seen now is we lost our label and we have lost our class. So these are unable to set because the constructor is not called anymore, because we passed the existing object. So these should have been in here, but we still are able to inject the icon. So the icon will be set here correctly. Okay. And since I'm talking about adding the object, I should probably talk about the factory as well. So let's say I want to create the button, but I'm not going to add it anywhere yet. So I could do app factory button. Okay, let's do the message. Okay, so as you see, the factory has created the object button, but it picked it up from the namespace. So ATK4 UI button object, and then it also accepts the parameters. So obviously I could do array in here. Let's do the label. So you see the label has is changing, and let's do the icon. Okay, so you see what's going on. So it does create the object as per these parameters. Now, with the factory, there is a possibility to take the icon into the second parameter, like this. And on the surface, the effect is pretty similar, but since you can do icon here, let's say let's do key, right? So you see the icon is now key. So this the seed over here is like a primary, and the second argument is a default. So to learn more about this, we can head off to Agile Core and looking at the seed. So that here's the factory. Here's how you can create a button with passing some parameters, and it talks about different components. So how they and then there's a merging parameter. So when you are passing something to the seed, the first is the button like this, and the second are the defaults. Right. If I specify the first parameter like that, okay, it will act as a default label. Yeah. So okay, let's do my other label, and you see the content is being set to that, but we're still working with the button. So the big difference between the first argument and the second is that the second cannot select which object is being created. That's done by the first one, and the second only can specify some of the defaults. So you can, for example, I'll give you an example. When we're creating table columns, it does use the factory, but that passes the parameter table equals this. Yeah, so that's in the code of add column, and user can pass this parameter. So it can be, for instance, a button, yeah, so we can just literally be the class, and the button is created, and this parameter is being set. Now this will actually fail because there are no property. Yeah, so the property table doesn't use the button, right? Okay, so it's good, but it's for columns that actually works. And then the final bit is this third argument, which is a namespace. So I can specify namespace blah, and now what it tries to do, it tries to take this class and prefix it with the namespace blah. And this is really useful when, for instance, we're doing a set layout. Okay, what is my so if in the warehouse app there is a set layout, and we're specifying centered. So the centered is actually a layout which is located under the namespace layout, and we can rely on the way how factory works to do all the job. So it's a lot of places in Agile UI got simplified just because we have this support for factories, and also with the merging even more is now possible. So really nifty stuff. And if you're going to create some components that rely on subcomponents, so such as something coming from a custom namespace, you can use that, and you can even use your own namespace here. So let's say my add-on blah. Yeah, so let's say that's your add-on, and blah is a namespace within your add-on. And as you create, it tries to load the button. This can be supplied by the user, so the user just selects the button and it will come from your namespace. So that's really handy. And if the class does exist, it will create an instance of this class and will inject these parameters. And by the way, you can also specify the arguments to constructor. Yeah. So and really nice stuff. So that's the change which was introduced in core. So namespace prefixing, so I talked about this, about seeds. And okay, let's go back to the Agile UI. Let's look what else is here. Tabs. So finally we have tabs, which is pretty awesome. Let's say tab. Okay, and now we can, instead of an app, I can use tab. And I could create another tab. Oh yeah, tab 2. This tab 1. So this is the name of the class, right? So if you're not comfortable writing, you can pass the object in here as well. And here we're creating the 2 tabs, and let's do the tab, and instead of message I'll use X. Let's see what happens. Oops. All right, so I have 2 tabs now. You can switch between them. This button is empty, right? Let's do a message. There, okay, so yeah, these tabs are working fine. Now it is also possible to create a callback tab. So let's say I add tab 3, but in here I would like to use a callback. So I specify a function, and I do here p add lorem ipsum. Now when I go to tab 3, you see it's loading, and it's always coming out with a different text. So that's a dynamic tab, and it is implemented through the callback. The P is a page, is a virtual page, and as you add more stuff in here, it will keep working just fine. So that's support for tabs. Okay, the next one is a new feature for doing notifications. Yeah, I should probably spell it correctly. Oh yes, forgot to specify an event. Okay, so when I click this button, the notification appears on top of this screen, kind of. But again, it's pretty early on. We'll probably need some help. If you want to help out, then by all means. But we need to make this notification look a little bit better. Also, from the way how you use it, it's probably going to change, but we still included that. It seemed pretty interesting. All right, so the next thing, let me talk about the callbacks. And oh yes, if you don't know what a callback is, then there is actually a pretty extensive section now added on explaining callbacks, virtual pages, and lots of other things. Okay, so that's the section under core concepts explaining the virtual pages, and let's dive into it. So the callback class, so essentially allows you to create some sort of custom URLs. Okay, let's do app and callback, and I'm going to clean this up. Let's say this add a message, and the body of the message would be get URL. Okay, so that's the callback. Essentially gives you some parameter, and if you do trigger it, oops. So nothing happens right now, but what you could do is set callback like that, and that's it. Okay, no arguments. Let's do exit in here as well. Right, so the change which we added recently is also about the way how exit is triggered. So let's say I have my app in here. In the way how Agile Toolkit does it, creates the exit handler. So if you don't actually call exact app and you add exit somewhere, let's say I add exit here before adding the message, then it will just render the whole page. Okay, but when it comes to the callback, so if you do that, if you do exit within the callback, then it will not render anything, because that's probably a proper way to do. So you could just do, you know, encode some stuff with JSON, and there you go, you got some sort of callback for getting data from whatever. Now if I output something before in front of this, then you'll see that the foo is still coming out. If I put it in here, it's not being executed anymore. So that's a normal behavior for the callback. So the callback will actually verify for the argument right here and will exit right away. There's another class called callback later, and the way how it's different from callback is that it will work. Oh yes, callback later. The URL is different. So it will get triggered, but it will be triggered during the render stage of the application. So even if I have echo over here, it will be outputted just before the execution. And this helps us in a situation where, for example, you add a CRUD. So if I add a CRUD over here on top, and then I set the model for the CRUD, if I use a regular callback, then it will get triggered immediately, even before the model is set, before conditions are set for the model, and that's quite a problem quite often. So virtual pages and everything else, they're using callback later, so they're using this one. And the problem with that one is, let's say you have some complex execution happening somewhere over here. So that's doing complex, and maybe you don't really need to do that if the callback is triggered. So now you could do I believe that's a method. When you're gonna fix that bug? Right, so you see it's true. So if you do if triggered, then do something else. Let's do exiting, wouldn't help, right? And if there are no trigger argument, then it does complicate execution, but the boolean over here is false. So that's handy if you know what you're doing, and if you want to prevent some complex code. But to be honest, in most cases it will just finish the initialization. It will not start any rendering because it will trigger after the initialization is done. Again, if you want to learn more, you can read further into this. Okay, and right, so that's triggered. And next is the biggest change, probably the way how add fields and add columns work. There's a big fundamental change, and it does cover a couple of issues, a couple of pull requests. It is a lot of refactoring, but this is a good type of refactoring, so it's a lot of cleanups. So the way how you can learn more about that, if you look into these two issues, and the issue has defined, so the issue 188 defined the rules how add column should work, add column and add field, and in the way they are consistent with each other. So if you're working with the columns, it's very similar to the way how we work with fields. And also we always look at two cases. So sometimes you have a table which has model, sometimes you have a table which doesn't have model, and the same with the form. So over here, just to demonstrate some of that, I'm going to do app add form, and then we're adding test, right? Something like that. Okay, so we have form, and there's a regular field called test. And previously, well, not with the fields, but there was a confusion with the columns. So when you specify the only parameter, it was expecting this parameter to be class. Lots of confusion. Now there are 3 arguments to add field and add column. So I'll show you an example with add field. So if I do the next one, let's see. Okay, let me look at that issue here. So if you just got one argument, that's the name of the field. And if I do specify another one, it is treated as a caption. Okay. Okay, let's check it out. What's wrong with this thing? Yeah. A small note over here. So we start using double exceptions. So exception happens when it tried to populate the property caption for the type line. Maybe it's called label, I'm not sure. And let's see. Can try that if I specify label like this. Oh, okay, yeah, there we go. So when it does attempt to create a field, this exception happens, but then it's contained inside this another exception which says unable to add form field. So you get a little bit more information about that. And sometimes you add fields through set model, and it populates the fields, and you need more information. So what decodes the exception, and this adds additional information as well. Yeah, so this does specify which field was used, right? So if we don't have the model associated with the form, it will create a field for us. So it will create a field test. All right, third argument. Now, if so, as I mentioned to you, okay, as I mentioned to you, the second parameter is all about decorator, and when we're talking about the form, so let me open the form. Oh, too many things open. Okay, if we're talking about about something like this, okay, you get a field called password. This is decorator, and that's the actual field. So let's talk about the components. Form is the main component. So the responsibility for the form is to draw all of this properly. Now, form relies on a thing called form layout. The form layout is the way is the one which draws these labels in here. So that's the label test. It is drawn by the layout. The layouts, the labels, the layout takes the label from caption. So if we specify the caption in here, it will pick this up. Okay. Then there is a field decorator. So that's the one which actually draws this password thing over here, and which decides whether we should show the letters, or maybe we should show it as a password. Let's see if that works. Okay, so now if you remember what I told you about seeds, this is actually the seed. So the password will be loading that particular class from the namespace called form field decorator. I believe it's called field decorator, and it passes label, which is a decorative property. So it just puts the label here. I could specify icon, I believe. I don't remember if we could do icon. I could try. Right, okay, so now we have icon here. So the second argument is all about decorating your field. The next thing is a field property, which is defined inside Agile data, and we describe it over here. So if we would have been associated with the model, then this will be using an actual field, but since we're not, we can pass some elements in here, so such as caption, right? It also defines, so I don't have to specify password, and I could do type password. So it is still a password field, but the way how it determines the field to be password now is because the type inside the model, field model, is password. And frankly, I can do enum as well. Let me see if that will work. Okay, yeah, so now we can select between these two. Now if I do specify both, then this takes precedence. Yeah, okay, so what happens here is it tried to create a password, but it tried also to specify the values to that field, and that's not correct. Yeah, so we can't do that. All right, we'll have to take my word for it. So if this specified over here and over here, then the decorator is takes the precedence, and that's the field definition. So if yeah, okay, so that is now consistent, and both of these arguments now also follow the rules of a seed. Right? Like, no, take this for example. So that's actually the second argument, and link, right? And for the constructor of the link column, it will pass this argument as the first argument, this argument as the second argument, and as you see, this is a destination of the link. And here we choosing to pass a parameter. The second argument specifies which fields we should pass, so the values of which fields are being passed. Again, there is an extensive documentation for the link property, teaches you how to do links. Right, what else can we do here? So yeah, and obviously, you know, as since these are seeds, they allow you to either pass a new object through new, so you can create your own decorator and pass it over here. Then the field will be created with you and decorated with your own class. I believe there are no documentation on how to create decorator yet. So you'll have to look at the code, how decorators are built, and then create one yourself. So this is the add column, this is add field. Let me just check if I have missed anything. Oh yes, by the way, it is also possible to omit the first argument. So it does make sense. For instance, if you have a form and you want to add captcha, then you don't really need to name it anyhow. You should be able just to add and specify the object. And to avoid confusion, I will not create collapse of the arguments in here. So if you'll have to specify null, and here would be new captcha, something like that. Or obviously you can also use seed, but I don't want to collapse it and make the first argument optional, because then it becomes really complicated with these three parameters. Also, I will be encouraging, so if there are any third-party add-ons which use a similar pattern of defining fields or columns, that depends on the physical columns in the database, I will be encouraging to use the same pattern, how they are defined in here. Okay, so that's the refactor of add field and add column. Additional changes. So yeah, I did mention about the callbacks, virtual pages, lots of documentation here. Oh yeah, a lot of minor elements have been documented. So if you go to the documentation of Agile UI, you click components in here, and there are simple components. So you can read how to do the button. You can learn about labels, and they have quite a few very nice examples. So that's if you're just starting with Agile UI, this is a really nice place where you can learn how to do some basic things. And I do link to the demo and to semantic UI page. And so you want header. This is what CSS allows you to do with the header. And it says, okay, this is how you can pass the parameters to CSS. Yeah, and if you want to know, so all these elements, they are based on the core component, which is called view, and that's now being separated, and you can learn a lot about views. So, yeah, so how the render is happening, how to change the logic, lots of it. And then we can look into things like tables. Table as well. It's a very unique component. It has a lot of stuff going for it. Yeah, so you can do columns, and then you have composite components, which is great. Yeah, so in here it just says, okay, it relies on table, because when you add a column to grid, it actually has a table in there inside, and it just passes on to that. So yeah, this release didn't change a lot in there, and then obviously we have some bug fixes as well. And yeah, so the last is that we started to put a lot of effort is to catch up with the code coverage. So let me just show you. So code coverage is 73 now, which is much better, but it still needs a lot of work. If we look inside Agile Core, for instance, okay, let's do here. So for Agile Core, we have achieved the 99% of code coverage. So it's really good. And we're using the code cove now, so it looks much nicer. Yeah, so the data coverage is probably can be improved a little bit, but that's how it is. Okay, and yeah, so that there are now more strict requirements for pull requests, and the requirement is that they must not decrease the code coverage. They can only improve code coverage. So this the stability of the UI, the quality of it is improving. A lot of new documentation has been added. And yeah, the best thing to try it for yourself, if you go to Agile Toolkit, click on the download link over here. So you will have the folder like this. And if you are on the Mac, very, very simple. So just open this. Oh, actually, I have it open already. Let me just close that. So you open this application and you just drag this folder and drop inside here. And what happens, it runs the PHP locally within that folder, and you got your test bed. Yeah, so you can start playing with Agile Toolkit over here. And that's the file, right? So that's the file. That's the admin. I modified it by adding the hello here button. So it's this. And so that pretty much sums it up. What's new in Agile UI 1.2. Oh, yeah, I should probably mention, and this has to do with forms. Okay, so that's actually pretty interesting feature. So let's look at the form. So a few things can happen. Yeah, I'll just complete this form. Okay, so this is a default form submission handler, and where is my form? Capture, yeah, no captures. Stay. So if I hit save, now we have a couple of checks. So first, it detects if there is any output like that, and it will warn us about that. How about something like that? So before that, you get like a very nasty JavaScript exception. Now you have, it's readable. You can say, oh, cool. Let's throw exception. Throw. Cool. Oh, call to undefined. Hey, new. So we're catching lots of different things now. Yeah, that's a general exception. We don't have a lot of information on that. Agile UI. Let's try that. Cool. You see, shows us exception nicely in a pop-up, so we can do something with it. All right, so that's form. That's how form works. But there probably would be some further improvements to that. So if, for instance, if you're using your application in production, you'll want to set up a logger. And as you know, PHP has a standard for loggers. And then instead of showing stuff to the user, we'll instead send it to the logger. And actually, inside IDK core, we already have done some work. Let me just see which maybe it's not there yet, but we are working on making Agile UI work consistently with loggers and also report errors in a much nicer way. So inside application, so if error happens and if user is allowed to see the error will be in the corner, so he can click and dismiss that error message. And again, you'll have tools to do all sorts of things. Anyway, that's it for the release of 1.2. Thanks again for your interest in Agile UI, and it improves significantly in terms of quality. And if you do want to integrate it with any other full stack framework, please let me know and we can work on that together. So thanks very much. Bye.